Today we are excited to have with us Bryce Moretsky. In 2013, Mr. Moretsky was appointed Director of Policy and Planning for the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, where he leads all of the agency's long-range planning while continuing to direct a number of policy initiatives. In addition, he supervises the implementation of the Office of Financial Education that was transferred to PHFA from the Department of Banking. Prior to joining PHFA, Mr. Moretsky was with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development as Deputy Secretary for Administration and Director of Legislative Affairs for the department, having joined the department in 2004 as Director of Policy. While there, he was charged with creating a complete revision of the silos attached to economic and community development to create a coordinated, comprehensive approach to rebuild and revitalize Pennsylvania communities. He graduated with a master's in urban and regional planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1988 and received his Bachelor of Political Science and Urban Studies from Pennsylvania State University in 1986. Bryce, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tori, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. The first thing I'd like to do is thank the Housing Alliance and Tori and Phyllis and David Hunter and the entire Alliance board and staff for their remarkable help both in the implementation of this program and getting the word out about the program, and specifically over the last few weeks, making critical calls to state legislators to make sure that the program remained, in play and out of the potential cutting from the state budget for this year. Their work was incredible, and as was much of the help from all of you on this line today and many others. So thank you all. Let me jump in quickly, and Tori's going to help me with advancing the slides since I'm doing this remotely. Let me jump in. This presentation really is about the PHARE program and sort of how it began, what it's focused on, and specifically sort of what we're looking for in 2017 from the request for proposals and application. So if we go to the first page, as many of you know, the Pennsylvania Housing Affordability and Rehabilitation Enhancement Fund, also known as the State Housing Trust Fund, was signed into existence by then Governor Rendell back in 2010. The reason for its creation back then was to take for the Commonwealth to have a vehicle to take advantage of at that point, the National Housing Trust Fund that were created through Freddie and Fannie Mae revenue. This was back in 2010, and those funds were put on hold, but the legislation, the PHARE legislation that was created is really a most remarkable, comprehensive, far-reaching piece of legislation that allows us as the administrators of the State Housing Trust Fund to really do all kinds of housing efforts, from pre-development work to post-development work to supportive services to tax credit projects to rehabilitation of existing homes and rental assistance and new construction. So pretty much anything that you can think of as it relates to housing and even how that housing helps rebuild communities, we can do through the PHARE program. And we have done all sorts of very innovative programs and projects across the Commonwealth with the funds since 2012. For 2017, we actually have an RFP that combines now the three funding sources that I'm going to talk about into a single unified request for proposal. Can you jump to the next slide, Tori? So those three funding sources are the Marcellus Shale Impact Fee, which began in 2012, the Realty Transfer Tax Fund, which had its first year in 2016, and the National Housing Trust Fund, again, which was originally created back in 2008 under the Housing and Economic Recovery Act, put on hold, and then restarted last year for the first time. So those are the three sources of funding that we now have that are all consolidated into a single RFP. And as I talk about the specifics of the RFP, you'll see how those three funds work in complement with each other and how you as an applicant can potentially access any one or a combination of multiple funds. A couple of facts about the State Housing Trust Fund. First is that we are required statewide to ensure that at least 30% of the funds distributed through the PHARE program go to households below 50% of the median area income. Again, this important part of the legislation, I'll talk about when we get into the application and how we implement it on a project-by-project basis with the application. The second piece of the legislation is that we are required to do an annual plan, and we usually put that plan out for public comment beginning at the end of December or 1st of January for 45 days of public comment, and then our board adopts a final plan usually in March or April of the succeeding year. So for 2018, we'll be putting out the plan toward the end of December and anticipating our board reviewing it probably in March or April of 2018. The other piece that we are required to do as a part of the legislation is provide an annual report on the program's impact. We list the projects that we funded, the amounts that we funded them for, what counties they were funded in, and that report goes to both the legislature as well as the governor's office. Jump to the next slide. So let me talk a little bit about the goals and priorities that we've outlined in the 2017 plan. And again, you can find this plan on our website at www.phfa.org. But the goals that we set out and the priorities that we've established for the 2017 PHARE plan are really to try and increase safe and affordable housing options across the Commonwealth. And this can be done in a variety of strategies, right? It can be through rehabilitating or reuse of existing or abandoned housing. It can be through rehabbing owner-occupied housing or providing rental assistance. It can be through creation of new affordable housing. And it can be through things like homeless prevention and rapid rehousing efforts that have been done in a number of places across the Commonwealth. We also one of the goals is we want to strengthen the existing housing stock, right? We need to make sure that our current housing stock remains strong and affordable for the long term. And so that's one of the goals. And we've had a number of projects that have received PHARE funding that have helped address the ability to retain that, upgrade that housing stock and retain it and ensure that it stays affordable into the future. Jump to the next slide, Tori. We're also looking for strategic approaches that address housing sort of within the context of the city's plan for housing and community revitalization. And again, I'm going to talk about how you articulate a little bit more to us about this area in your request in the application. But we really see that obviously housing is so critical to much of what happens in communities and how it impacts families, impacts economic revitalization. And so we really want to see most communities have a strategic plan that talks about how that housing and the role of that housing, where it should be prioritized, And so we're looking to see where those needs are and how these projects and programs can impact those plans. We also are looking at the targeting of locations within communities that have seen significant disinvestment. So whether it's in more rural parts of the Commonwealth that have not had a lot of housing production, a lot of housing investment or preservation, if it's within neighborhoods of a city or a borough that have seen disinvestment or are in need of housing upgrades, we're very interested in those kinds of efforts as well. And finally, obviously, we are interested in leveraging, maximizing the ability to leverage these FARE dollars, leveraging other public and private dollars to the greatest extent possible. And we have been, to date, very successful in using the FARE funds and all of you as applicants bringing lots of other dollars to the table to get your projects and programs implemented. We realize that, even the $12 million that we had last year through the Realty transfer tax couldn't address all the housing needs across all 67 counties. And so we had to look at and make decisions about where we could get the greatest leveraging of those FARE dollars. So let's jump to the next slide. We're also looking at how the fund helps to foster partnerships and to sustain housing for the long term and address housing needs over the long term. As many of you know, and as we've seen in almost every application that we've received into the program, partnerships are critical, and whether it's a for-profit working with a not-for-profit, doing development and supportive services, or a community development corporation working with a human service organization, looking at how to help first-time home buyers. We realize that and think that the FARE funds can be used to really foster those partnerships to ensure that the housing that's created, the programs that are implemented, really are able to be sustained and address needs for a long period of time. And we also see that these funds can help incomes across a range of a wide band, right? We're required under the legislation to ensure that at least 50% go to households below 50% of the median area income, but we've also allowed projects to go up to 200% of the median area income as well. So we think that mixing incomes, mixing uses provides greater opportunities to address a range of housing. Please jump to the next slide. So let me now start into the various funding streams that we've consolidated into this RFP. The first one is the Marcellus Shale. This set of funds goes back to 2012 legislation that was created called the Marcellus Shale Impact Fee legislation that was signed by then Governor Corbett in 2012. And it is an impact fee that's imposed on the drilling companies for wells that they have drilled in the previous year or in previous years. It's a formula that includes when the well was drilled, the price of natural gas, and the age of the well, and they pay a percentage of the revenue into the public PUC, the Public Utility Commission, and those funds, some of those funds go back to the local governments, local municipalities, called the local share. Other portions of that fund go to help environmental issues, help deal with land remediation, environmental causes, and part of those funds comes to PHFA and the FARE program to address housing and the impact of housing from the Marcellus Shale drilling. The way that these funds are, when the legislation was created, the way these funds are targeted is that they are only available 2 counties that have active wells that are drilled in those counties. And for 2017, that's 32 counties. And I'll get to a list of those counties. It's also in your RFP. It's changed over the years. I think originally it was at 37 or 38 counties. It's now down to 32 counties that have active wells and therefore have an impact fee that's paid by a driller and therefore have FARE funds through the Marcellus Shale program that are available to them. So if you jump to the next slide, please. So to date, since 2012, we have $40 million on 188 projects. Again, as I talked about, using the sort of breadth and comprehensiveness of the FARE legislation, we've been able to do rental assistance, blight remediation, land banking, first-time home buyer work, tax credit, helping tax credit projects do pre-development and site preparation work for housing that's going to be developed on a site in the future, acquisition of property for development, for housing development, a whole range of activities under these 188 projects and programs. And on our website, you can also see the project summaries from prior year awards that are all listed to give you some sense as you're thinking about ideas, things that we've been able to fund. The way the legislation allocates funds to the FARE program is that there's 2 components. One is a base amount of funding of $5 million that's paid into the FARE program from the PUC based on well drilling. And then there's also a provision in the legislation that says that the municipalities get the greater percent or 50%, $500,000 or 50% of their previous year's municipal budget, and anything above that amount comes into the FARE program as what we call the excess or spillover funds account for those municipalities. And that has been a significant amount of money. I think it's been as high as about nearly $5 million on top of the base amount of $5 million, primarily in 6 counties. Those funds have obviously decreased over the years as the drilling has slowed down, the age of the wells has increased, and the price of natural gas has fallen. We have received fewer and fewer excess surplus funds into the FARE program, and for 2017, we're down to about $700,000 in this spillover excess funds, and it's only in 5 counties. We still have the base amount, so we have a total available of about $5.7 million into the Shale 32 counties. The one other legislation that's relevant for the FARE program is that at least 50% of the funds that we distribute through the FARE program for Marcellus Shale have to go through to 5th through 8th class counties. Again, with the first $39 million, about 80%, at least 75 to 80% of it has gone to the 5th through 8th class counties. So we've not had a problem meeting that test, but it is a legislative requirement. So let's, can we jump to the next slide? So this is a listing of the 32 counties that are eligible for the Marcellus Shale funds for 2017. You can go to the next slide. A couple of other sort of policy decisions we made back early on with the program, and that still are relevant for if you are applying specifically under the FARE program for these funds. First, you must be located, obviously, in one of the eligible counties. And the county, we have asked that the counties be the applicants, but they, and you see this as the bullet, but the second bullet is that the counties have the right and may a specific applicant, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, to be their applicant of the Marcellus Shale Fund for the county. And this has worked quite well. The counties provide what we need here is that for the application is that the commissioners need to actually provide a letter designating the organization applicant for the Marcellus Shale Act 13 funds. And the county will need to prioritize if there are more projects than there likely are funds available for the county. They will need to prioritize and give us some sense of their priorities based on sort of their planning for housing needs and tell us what they feel their priorities are. County applicants are permitted to submit tax credit projects. In previous years, we asked that the Marcellus Shale funds go to projects that had already a tax credit application and then apply for the PHARE program. Because the tax credit applications and the PHARE applications are both due on the same day this year, October 20th, we are allowing simultaneous submission if you'd like to be considered for PHARE funds and are also submitting a tax credit application. You will still need an applicant for the county, but we're more than happy to have simultaneous submission of tax credit and PHARE projects. Jump to the next slide, please. The second pot of funds, which began last year in 2016, are the Realty Transfer Tax, is the Realty Transfer Tax Program. This was signed by Governor Wolf back in 2015, and it dedicates a portion of the increase in the Realty Transfer Tax, and the Realty Transfer Tax is tax that is paid every time real estate is sold, and a portion of the tax goes back to the county, and a portion of it comes to the Commonwealth. And we receive, the way the formula works is that there was a base amount established in fiscal year 2014-2015 of $447.5 million. And anything above that amount of money at the end of the year, at the end of June 30th of each year, the Department of Revenue reviews the total amount, and anything above $447.5 million, 40% of the funds of that increase comes into the State Housing Trust Fund, up to a total of $25 million. And so for 2016, we had about $12.1 million. And for 2017, we anticipate that we'll have about $17 million available for the Realty Transfer Tax Program. A couple of things that this legislation did is, most critically, it expanded the eligible counties to the entire Commonwealth. So where the Marcellus Shale Fund can only be used in those counties that have well drilling, the 32 counties that were listed, the Realty Transfer Tax Funds are available in the entire Commonwealth in all 67 counties. So last year, with we received about 140 applications and funded about half of them, 68 projects. Again, many of the incredibly creative, innovative ideas, from new construction to rehabilitation to rental assistance to rapid rehousing for homeless families and individuals, to supportive services and housing counseling, first-time home buyer, weatherization kinds of programs, all were sort of efforts that we were able to fund with the PHARE RTP funds last year. Can you, next slide, please. So the other big change is that we have opened up the eligible applicants to essentially any organization, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit or quasi-governmental, government or quasi-governmental entity can apply for these funds. So it can be a redevelopment authority, an economic development or community development group, housing development corporation, a business improvement district or neighborhood improvement district, any organization that is not-for-profit that's a 501(c)(3), any governmental, quasi-governmental entity, any for-profit organization is eligible to apply for these funds. Next slide, please. The third pot of funds that we have put into, that now have into the FARE, is the original money that was supposed to go into the State Housing Trust Fund, which is the national fund. Again, this was created back in 2008 as part of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act, and it was quickly then sort of put on hold almost as soon as it was enacted, when Fannie and Freddie were sort of put under receivership and hit with bankruptcy in 2008. And the funds it was finally determined in 2014 that the funds were, that the two agencies, government-sponsored enterprises, were solvent enough to put funds into the National Housing Trust Fund. And so for 2016 was the first year that we actually received allocation through the Housing Trust Fund. We received about $3.8 million. It is a block grant to the states that comes from a dedicated percentage revenue from Fannie and Freddie. There's no congressional appropriation that's required, but these funds are administered through HUD. And so we are required to do consolidated planning and work with the Department of Community and Economic Development to do the planning process specifically as it relates to HUD to be able to draw down these funds. And we have requirements imposed on us and then obviously to the applicants for these funds in terms of environmental constraints and requirements, reporting and monitoring requirements, and fiscal controls that are imposed on the National Housing Trust Fund dollars. Next slide, please. So each state receives at least $3 million. For last year, we received $3.8 million. For 2017, we anticipate that we'll be getting about $5.8 million. And at least 90% of the National Housing Trust Fund have to be used for rental. Specifically targeted, we have decided that we're specifically targeting it for extremely low-income tenants, and we're targeting the low-income housing tax credit projects and units within those projects as the most efficient and kind of effective way to deploy the National Housing Trust Fund dollars. They're projects that already have to go through a lot of underwriting and review, and so our funds we get with the National Housing Trust Fund specifically for 4% and 9% tax credit projects only, and then target units and buy down units within those projects. So you have to, in the tax credit program, to check off the National Housing Trust Fund box. And then on the, you can do an abbreviated FARE application, again, that I'll talk about when we get into the specifics of the RFP. Can you jump to the next slide? So the RFP requirements. Applications are due to us by 2 p.m. on October 20th. They need to be physically in our office. They can, so if you're going to mail them, you need to provide enough mailing time so that they are received by us by October 20th at 2 p.m. They can't be stamped in at your post office on October 20th. We need actually to physically have them. We unfortunately can't yet receive electronic applications, but so we are asking for a hard copy and one copy on a CD. And I'll get to that when we talk more specifically. But application 2 p.m. in our office on October 20th. This is also the same for many of you for submission of the low-income housing tax credit applications. We are asking, again, it's a requirement of state legislation for the PHARE program. We are asking each applicant to commit to at least 30% of their PHARE fund to households below 50% of the median area income. This is the only way that we can ensure that we're able to meet the legislative requirement of having at least 30% of those funds statewide address the households below 50% of the median. So each application should be prepared to commit to providing at least 30% of their awarded PHARE funds to households below 50%. And again, as I talked about, sort of the ability to sort of, go up to a little higher income, we are allowing projects to go up to 200% of the county median area income, but not exceed 200%. And the final sort of requirement in this section is that no more than 10% of the PHARE award can be used for administrative costs. And when we talk about administrative costs, we mean sort of the pure overhead, indirect costs. You are able, as a part of a program or a project, you're able to include staff, case management that are directly serving clients, providing services on a direct basis as a part of your program cost. But any overhead, executive director, other indirect costs would be limited to 5%. Next slide, please. So the specific components of the RFP, and many of you are probably already, that are considering applying, have probably already started various pieces of this. The first section is the narrative, and again, this is a very concise overview of what you are planning to do, what your project or program is. You should be able to tell us a little bit about how you're addressing a significant need, how the program's helping address a housing concern, how it's connected to the overall housing strategy for your neighborhood or community. What does the market look like for the project or the program? But again, this is a very short and concise overview of the project or program that you're proposing. This next tab, and these are sort of tabs that you would put in your application, is the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan will be different depending on whether you're doing a development or a new construction or a rehabilitation project or a program, housing supportive services, rental assistance, or more housing program. And again, the kinds of things we're looking for here is how does this project or program fit within the overall community plan or more comprehensive plan for housing overall. And so what gap are you trying, what need this project or program fill in? And what are, how does the project really address a compelling unmet need in that community? On the development side, in this section, we'll be looking for things like evidence of site control, conformance with zoning, a map of the site, and that identifies both the project site as well as other critical sort of landmarks near the site of the project. supportive services, hospitals, schools, or even developments that are nearby. You're going to want to include a budget here, development budget, both sources and uses, hard costs, break out the hard costs of construction as well as the soft costs of construction, all as a part of the comprehensive plan section for development projects. Specifically tell us here what income groups you're targeting. Are you looking at specifically very low income, a mix of incomes, first-time home buyer, 50 to 80% of median area income? What are the incomes that you plan to target, and how you're going to address the need for each of those, and what's the market for each of those different income bands? On the program, what we'd be looking for is the description, obviously, of the program. Who's the organization? What's the capacity of the organization that's going to be implementing the project or the program to carry it out? What's its track record of success in being able to do similar efforts? If this is sort of something they haven't done, or you're proposing an expansion of an existing program, how will this enhancement or expansion impact need, and what's the need for the expansion, the enhancement? Again, we'll want a detailed budget for the program, specifically how you're going to use the FARE funds, and also sort of the overall program budget that you will be needing for the program to get the program implemented. In the next section, number 3 is the finance. Again, here's where we want a specific listing of all the sources of financing for your project or your program. If you have uncommitted funding or financing that you need, we'd like to know the timeline for when you're going to secure those other sources, or when you anticipate getting those. If an application's been submitted, you're just waiting to hear, or if you've heard and you're still waiting for a grant agreement, we need to know the details of those other sources of funds. And again, this is the section that we use to really analyze sort of how much match each of the FARE dollars is going to be able to leverage from other sources. If you have letters evidencing those other commitments, we would ask you to include those in this section as well. Section 4 is the partnerships. So again, as I talked about in the plan priority, we realize that partnerships are critical to getting projects developed, sustaining them into the future, and really making sure that they're comprehensive and coordinated in the best possible manner. And so we want to hear about, this is the section where you tell us a little bit about who the partners are that you're anticipating working with. Again, whether it's a land bank that's working with the redevelopment authority and working with the community development corporation, and maybe a developer to acquire and redevelop property. If you're a homeless provider that's working with shelters to do rapid rehousing and you're going to be providing the rental assistance, first and last month's rent, security deposits. What are the other, where are you getting intake? How's the case management happening? Who are the partners that are going to be providing the supportive services and the various pieces if you're not doing it all, if you're not doing all of it? So this is really where you tell us how your partnerships are going to make the project more effective and more sustainable into the future. The next section, number 5, is the timeline. We expect that projects, once they get their FARE funds, have a year to implement their projects or programs. Many are able to get going right away. Others of them take a little bit longer. But we expect, there are obviously extenuating circumstances that put a year, that don't have a year working for everybody. but we expect once we award the FARE funds to you that you will implement the project within a year, and hopefully sooner. And the reason why we ask sooner the better is that obviously we're required to produce a report on an annual basis to the legislature, and so the more that we can talk about what we've been successfully able to get going and get in the ground, get moving, get implemented, and ultimately get completed, I think is strong justification for making sure that the funds remain in the program. So we ask for you to provide, as a part of this timeline, are there major milestones? So if you're going to be doing pre-development, acquisition, rehabilitation, and then marketing of new construction for sale homes that you have for that project. And so just identify what those milestones are as a part of this timeline. The next piece is the fact sheet, and this is a very important but short document. It is now a fillable PDF document on the application, so you don't have to print it and type it in or handwrite it in. You can actually fill it in and submit it as a part of your application. This is a very short, sort of just the facts, either Appendix A or Appendix B, depending on whether you're doing a rehabilitation or new construction project or whether you're doing a supportive service or program, housing program. You'll either do Appendix A or Appendix B. And in some cases, you may provide us with both. We would ask that you choose the appendix where you are expending most of the vast bulk of your FARE dollars and where you're sort of providing the vast bulk of your effort. So if you are primarily doing a rehab and resale effort that may include a small first-time home buyer sort of component, we would see that as sort of a project, a redevelopment project, and ask you to complete Appendix A, versus sort of a if you're doing case management for a homeless shelter and primarily paying staff and a little bit of rental assistance, first and last month rent kind of thing, that would be more sort of a supportive service and Appendix B. So that would be an Appendix B. So we would ask you to think about where you're going to be targeting the bulk of your FARE funds and choose the appendix that is most appropriate. And then the last piece is sort of a declaration of that you're committing to only limiting the administrative fee to 5% of your overall FARE award. We just need to make sure that we don't have FARE funds going to non-appropriate uses, and so we're asking each project to commit to limiting their overhead administrative costs to 5% of their overall FARE award. So that sort of brings us to the end of the kind of main body of the requirements. The next piece of the requirements are for subcomponents. So if you are looking at doing a Marcellus Shale and a Realty transfer tax proposal, or you should submit one completed copy of the entire RFP, a hard copy in a 3-ring binder tabbed with each of the 7 sections, and then one electronic copy. Please use a CD. We seem to have a little bit of a problem with being able to use pin drives, thumb drives in our IT system. So we would ask you that you provide a CD. I know it's a little antiquated, and we're hoping to move away from that for next year, but one hard copy and one electronic copy. Again, as I outlined, the binders should be organized and numbered as they are in the RFP. If you're applying for the Housing Trust Fund, these are projects only applicable for tax credit projects, and so you would complete the FARE application, but you only need to complete the Number one, the narrative, the appropriate appendix, primarily Appendix A, and then the environmental checklist section. If you are applying for National Housing Trust Fund, please make sure that you review the environmental checklist and the link that's provided through the RFP to the environmental checklist, and include that in your PHARE application. And then you will also then obviously be doing a complete tax credit application. Next slide, please. So for tax credits, again, as I said, if you're in the PHARE Marcellus Shale eligible, one of the 32 counties that are part of the Marcellus Shale region, and you want to apply for the funds, you need to be designated by the county as an eligible applicant or designated applicant by the county commissioners with a letter supporting that, and that needs to be included also in your PHARE application. You can apply directly to us for the RTP and the Housing Trust Fund. And again, as I talked about for tax credits, you would include the one-page narrative, the Appendix A, and the environmental checklist sections. Next slide, please. So for tax credit projects that request and receive PHARE funds, we will be structuring those awards in a loan that is similar to the Penn Homes, and many of you know or have received Penn Home loan, Penn Homes funds through us. We will be structuring the PHARE dollars in that same manner. So the agency would actually retain those funds and structure them as a Penn Homes-like loan and disperse them as a part of the tax credit project. We anticipate that recommendations for PHARE awards will be made in April of 2018. And we also will require that we expect that affordability requirements must be in place for 10 years for qualified households. Next slide, please. This is a great slide that sort of provides sort of an overview of the three funding streams and sort of who's eligible and just kind of a short, quick overview at a glance that my colleague Clay Lambert put together. We also will require from grantees, awardees, semi-annual reports. And so we will be sending you, as a part of your grant agreement, what the reporting form looks like on a semi-annual basis. And so be prepared. Again, those semi-annual reports are what we use to produce our reports to the legislature. And so it's critical for us to get those semi-annual reports in a timely manner and also completed as thoroughly as possible. So for awards that get 2000 PHARE funds, your first semi-annual report would be due at the end of January of 2019. And then semi-annual reports are due July 31st and January 31st of each subsequent year until the funds have fully been expended, and then you would do a closeout report. So next slide. Additional resources, we have lots of previous project PHARE plan. We have a frequently asked questions document that has grown to probably 40 or 50 or so pages, and we would encourage you to, if you've got questions about the program, about the RFP, specific components of the RFP, to go to the FAQ document and use that as a resource. And all of these resources are available on our website. Next, please. So my contact information, my colleague Clay Lambert's contact information, I believe he's on the line today and is really sort of the critical key person The other person that many of you have worked with and continue to work with is Melissa Raffensperger-Grover. And so, we work as a team, and so please feel free to reach out to us either through email or calls. We're happy to help you in whatever way we can. We also have staff from our Southeast office, headquartered in Norristown, Nancy Twyman, who's available to provide technical assistance. And we have someone in our Southwest office as well. We'll get you a name specifically and get that up on our website who can help in the Southwest for applicants out there. So that should bring us to the end. I'm sorry, is there any other?
Great. Thanks, Bryce, so much for this comprehensive overview of the application and the process. So now we are going to open it up for questions. So we have a lot of people on the call today, so we're actually going to ask people to type in any questions in the chat box. We already have about 8 questions, so I'm hoping to just, we have a few minutes left, so hoping to get through these great questions that people asked.
Sure.
So the first question I have is there a goal to increase accessible as well as safe and affordable housing?
Yes, there is. Yes, we would, we certainly encourage and will be seeking to increase accessible housing as well as a part of projects.
And
if there are projects that are specifically targeted to doing accessible modifications, we have actually funded a couple of those efforts. We're more than happy to look at those applications as well.
Great. Another question, who reviews and makes the final decisions on the PHARE applications?
So staff, all of us review all of the applications and assess them, analyze them, make sure that they've got everything. We do sort of an initial evaluation and make sort of initial recommendations. They're reviewed by Brian and others at PHFA, and ultimately our board, we present our recommendations, the staff's recommendations to our board of directors for final review and approval.
Great. Another question, if the proposed project is to undertake demolition activities, how do you meet the 30% requirement that the funds are being used to assist households below 50% of AMI? Does the census tract and or block group come into play to make that justification?
That's a great question. Yes, I mean, we'd be helpful to provide the census tract block group information. If you've got it, that would be very helpful for us. We do have some discretion. Again, we have to make sure statewide that we're meeting the 30% test, but we also realize that there are some projects and types of projects and programs that don't neatly fit into the setting aside 30% automatically for households at that target range, right? And pure demolition would be that kind of effort. What we would be looking for in that application is sort of what's the plan for, while the PHARE funds may be used for the demolition, we'd be looking at sort of the overall plan for the redevelopment of that particular property. Is it going to be targeted to new construction or infill housing, or is it going to be turned into some other public use, a park or something like that? And so we would want to see not just what the overall plan is for the reuse of the site once the property's been demoed. But we do recognize that meeting that 30% requirement is not always going to work.
Great. Does the RFP have a requirement for accessible units?
It does not have a set-aside requirement for accessible units.
Okay. Is this proposal in addition to the tax credit application being submitted to PHFA, or does this information need to be separately and directly sent to you?
No, the FARE information gets sent directly to Clay Lambert, delivered to Clay Lambert, or with his name on the application on October 20th. So it's separate. You will do for those of you that are doing tax credit projects, you will submit your tax credit application. You will also have to submit a hard copy of your FARE application to us. So it is two different submissions.
Can a county designate more than one for-profit nonprofit to apply for Marcellus Shale funds?
Yes, they may. Not a problem.
We are intending to submit an application for an owner-occupied rehab program to target specific remediation measures for the owner. For the comprehensive plan, should we use the first or second outline listed in the RFP?
That's an issue. I would probably use it's probably more, I would say it's more of a housing program since you're doing owner, so I would probably look more at the second part of the comprehensive plan for programs, housing programs, because you're really not, while you're helping a homeowner maybe with a small grant or a loan to renovate their home, exterior, or do weatherization improvements or other upgrades. It's primarily sort of a housing program. It's probably not actually creating new units or significantly rehabilitating existing units.
If applying for tax credits and FARE, do you want the narrative, appendix, and environmental checklist to be sent to the FARE program? Or just included in tab 42 of the submission to PHFA for the tax credit application?
No, it needs to be, those three sections need to be given to us, to send to Clay in a separate binder with just those sections. You would also then include those same sections in tab 42 of your tax credit application, but we don't want to have to, obviously tax credit people are going to be inundated with lots and lots of applications, and so we need to begin our review as quickly as possible, and so we're asking that applicants submit the same information but in a separate binder specifically to us.
So we have 4 questions left. I just want to see if we can get through them before we end the webinar. Okay. Is a request for pre-development funds eligible?
Yes. Again, we would want to see the overall plan for development, but if you want to target your FARE funds for the pre-development component, that would be all right. But we would need to see the overall plan.
This person says there was their building was placed in service in 2015 with tax credit and FARE funds. If an additional program was to be added to the project but does not create any additional housing, can you still apply for additional FARE funds?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, you may. You can.
If a county applies under Marcellus Shale, can PHFA decide to fund it under the RTT section?
Yes, we may decide. Yes. So, I mean, if you want to just be considered under the RTT, you don't have to get the county designation, but know that the RTT funds, the Marcellus Shale funds, only go to the 32 counties that are in the Marcellus Shale region. And so if you check the Marcellus Shale box and want to be considered for that $5.7 million pot, you need to have a designation from the county. if you want to be considered for Act 13 and RTT, you will still need the designation, and we can then look at both combining some RTT funds with Act 13 funds to fund the project potentially. But if you just want RTT, you don't have to get the designation. But know that we may struggle if there's, because we'll be trying to we want to make sure we use up the Act 13 funds in Act. Obviously, they have to be used in Act 13 counties, and so we'll be looking at how to plug those in. I'm not sure. You can call me if you have more questions about that answer.
And the last question, does FARE funding trigger prevailing wage if an individual rehab, et cetera, goes over the $24,999 trigger point?
So FARE state grant funds. So you will need, projects will need to, outside of tax credit, the way we're handling the tax credit project during them as Penn Homes loan, prevailing wage requirements in the past. But if you're not a tax credit application, you will need to seek guidance from whether your particular project will trigger, and your particular use of FARE funds within that project may or may not trigger prevailing wage requirements. It's not something we can opine.
Thanks, Bryce. Sorry we weren't able to answer all of the questions. If you have any questions, feel free to email Bryce or Clay. And we will be sending out this audio and the PowerPoint next week. So thank you, everybody, and thanks, Bryce, so much for getting on the webinar today and giving us this wonderful, really comprehensive information. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Good time.
Great. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And again, thanks so much for getting on.